Chasing the Dragon is the sophomore full-length album from Helms Deep. This is now I think a Florida-based heavy metal band, a power thrash metal band by some definitions, and one that is certainly influenced by 80s US power metal, as well as the new wave of British heavy metal. That sort of early 80s power metal and thrash metal upsurge through the mid 80s. And I think the thing with this record is that it's a general improvement overall beyond the debut Treacherous Ways back in 2023. In terms of the way that they've kind of conveyed a lot of information in interviews, is that first record came together by the kind of as a learning process, and it certainly had a lot of Mike Heller's input, the drummer at the time from Raven and Malignancy, and it kind of pushed into power metal a little bit more than it seemed like he'd intended, the main fellow, Alex Sciortino. And now that all those skills have developed and they've kind of been pushing a lot more for this record, this is kind of the do-over. In some sense, it's a little bit closer to the ideal that Sciortino had in mind early on. And the way that he does that is he brings in a couple of new folks. He brings in a very strong rhythm section, very skilled performers, very much like a Fates Warning style setup in terms of the players on the album. And then the best thing that he does is he brings better guitar playing, more harmonies, and a completely expanded vocal oeuvre. And what I mean is that his range has quadrupled beyond that first record. He's doing a lot more with his already pretty impressive voice. The bar is kind of mid-range for power thrash metal and recreation of 80s heavy metal, more about attitude and a little bit of a shriek than anything else for a lot of vocalists. But he brings enough variety here that it characterizes this album as a big event, and it's an hour-long thing. So before I kind of overwhelm you with information, we'll cut to a song here and get a sense for how tuneful the record is and how that counts for a lot on their return. So my initial interest with this band for their first record was that you could tell there was influence from a lot of US power metal that I like from the 80s. It's definitely an 80s metal coded band in general and an idea. And then Sciortino's kind of riff writing takes influence from everything from Satan to, I would say Agent Steel, but it's probably stuff like Griffin and whatnot. Basically the stuff that was influenced by Judas Priest beyond the early 80s that kind of ramped up when speed metal showed up. And that was kind of the big deal with that first record. Traditional heavy metal is also a big part of that. So we do get kind of the Riot, Thundersteel vibe from some of these songs. We do get a lot of the pieces of which are meant to show off the improved guitar prowess, way more solos. There's two guitarists trading left and right channels. They're trading off riffs and solos throughout this whole thing. So it is a bigger heavy metal record in that sense. It's a very 80s feeling one in every sense, but it's complemented by his vocal style. And I think Sciortino's voice is imperfect in the best way. That's the tradition of heavy metal. Is not perfect, but it's a show. It's a big deal. They're putting out a big personality, and I think they nailed it quite a bit better on this record. Otherwise, I think this is a record that is again, it's an hour long, so they cover a lot of ground, and they do a little bit too much for my taste. That ambition is met with skill in every case. What I would say is that I don't think it needed a 7-minute closing instrumental. I don't know that it needed a couple of songs that are on here, but all of them are very well done, and it does serve as more than just an extension of their previous record, but a doubling of their efforts, and one that is pretty impressive for a band that's probably not going to tour. I think this is a pretty entertaining record that starts to build a name for the band beyond that first one, and so I think more people will take notice of this, and they rightfully should, especially if you're a fan of everything from 80s US power metal to maybe even early 90s power metal, as well as more traditional heavy rock and progressive rock tinged stuff in the late 80s. So if you liked my mention of Fates Warning, I think you'll like a lot of the songs on this record. They do kind of play around with melody beyond the power metal stuff. Check it out. It's a high recommendation for me. It is certainly one of the more refined and just inspired records from June, and one that I think traditional heavy metal fans who are obsessed with the 80s still will appreciate very much. So check that out. Again, it released on June 20th, and go ahead and read my review for more of my thoughts.